listening to PJ and Friends on pjandfriends.com. Orlando, Florida. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of the station, owners, management, and sponsors. If you find any content disagreeable, you may exercise your right to change the channel. And now, on with the show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're on the air, PJ and Friends, broadcasting live from Orlando, Florida. I want to thank you guys for taking a moment to hang out with us today. Let's see. It is Wednesday, July 10th, 2013, and I have a special guest coming on with me. One moment, let me bring him on here. Mr. Wilson, you there?
No, I'm over here.
Okay. Well, that's good that you're there, and I'm here, and everybody's here.
Hi, PJ.
Hi, how are you?
Excellent.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I realize, several years ago I used to actually be on a real radio show, and I had the privilege of having Dave Russell and a couple of the SAC people there, and I was just as giddy then as I am now about this because it's important to me, and it's just an honor to have you on, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
You're welcome.
For those of you that don't know Mr. Wilson, C. McNair Wilson, and oddly enough, a couple of years ago when I said, hey, David, speaking of David Russell, do you know McNair Wilson? He said, well, yes, I knew him when he was Craig. And I said, oh, okay. But yes, he knew of you and worked with you for many years and had the privilege of knowing you guys when you were creating a lot of the stuff that you created. And, you have been awesome. I mean, you Renaissance fairs. You did a lot of stuff with SAC. Helped co-create SAC Comedy Lab. Did a lot of the interactions with Disney. You're an Imagineer, I guess an Imagineer for life. You're a speaker. You're an author, and are you? But the question is, are you a nice guy?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Very blessed and fortunate to pursue a lot of my dreams.
Very cool. One of the things that again, my history or my love is from the SAC Comedy Lab side of things, simply because I don't think people realize, at least for me anyway, how much that particular part of that entity has affected so many things. For example, I did not know until years later, my love of Renaissance fairs, SAC had a lot to do with the parts and pieces of it that I liked. I did not know that a lot of the shows that I fell in love at Disney, the Epcot shows, and a lot of the things there that SAC had a hand in and helped create and implement there. When I fell in love with the theater here in Orlando, and I would go and see the shows and realized, hey, that entity had a hand in all the things that I loved so much and throughout the years had affected me. And you were blessed to become an Imagineer and became, helped with things like the Tower of Terror and things like that. Can you give us a little idea of how SAC started and, how you guys moved on to the way you did?
I joined a group of street performers based in San Diego called Lamb's Players. And one of the members was one of the leaders of the group, a fellow named Glenn Hansen, now known as Herbie, or Herb Hansen. And I latched onto each other pretty quickly. I stayed with them about, not quite a year and a half. And we did original medieval and Renaissance-style street comedies that our director wrote. And we did them at mostly colleges around the country, and also we did the Minnesota Renaissance Festival a couple of years. Very successful, cast of 16, traveled in a bus and so on, but we did colleges. And Herbie and I kept dreaming of doing more improvisational stuff. He and I one day, just out of lack of audience at a college, created a little pre-show and went from having about 20 people to a few hundred. And that led to he and I doing more and more improv to create an audience. And when I left SAC to pursue my one-man play that I had written, SAC was not Lamb's Players was not invited back to the Minnesota Renaissance Festival. And Herbie got a call from the directors of that festival and said, can you put a troupe together? He had subsequently left Lamb's Players to finish his college degree at the University of Minnesota. He was from there. Long story short, we put together, we were sitting in a restaurant in San Diego, and we said, well, why don't we just tell stories? My mother had done a thing when I was in junior high school. She was the drama coach, called Brown Bag Theater, where you'd go into the drama room and there'd be large grocery bags, and there would be pieces of characters in them. So there might be a top hat, a cane, and a pair of white gloves, or a purse and an old lady's hat, and so on. And you'd have to pick those out and just create a character. You didn't know till you grabbed the bag what was in there. And I said, well, we've got little bits and pieces of costumes and stories. What if we took, a burlap sack like everybody buys at the Renaissance Festival, and just put pieces of costumes in? Because poor street performers, we never get a new costume. We get a new hat, then we get a new vest, then we get but you don't throw the old stuff away. And in fact, that's how the professional street theater companies of Europe, which actually began in Bologna, hence Il Teatro di Bologna, in Italy, would go through a town, and one of the ways they'd get paid was food, lodging, and clothes, or costume bits, or fabric. Long story short, we went to the Minnesota Renaissance Festival. We took the rope ladder. We're paid to do the rope ladder. We're the only concession paid to do it because we did it as a show. And we started telling stories, Herbie and I did, for the first weekend, and pulling people out of the audience. And there was a troupe of about 5 or 6 of us. Terry Olson was a part of that first year, that first troupe. And within 2 weeks, the owners of the festival said, can you guys come and do the St. Louis Festival? And so we made an outrageous request that they'd have to fly us down every weekend, they'd have to put us up, they'd have to pay us. No matter what we asked for, they said yes. Well, that was 1977. And then in 1982, we were in the Tampa Bay area at the Largo, what used to be called the Largo Renaissance Festival. A couple of directors from Epcot saw us, said they were looking for something for Epcot. We'd heard they were. We went and met with them. And I said, look, rather than talking about whether or not we work together, let's pretend we are going to work together and plan what that would look like. And then Vice President of Entertainment, Peter Blaustein, says, well, that cuts about 2 hours of BS out of my day. A couple months later, they flew us back down to do some shows at what used to be the Disney Shopping Village, the plaza area there in the middle of downtown Disney. Invited a bunch of Disney employees who loved the shows, but they just thought it was just too wild and audience participatory, and it was clean. In the SAC Theater, we always worked clean, but they just had never seen anything that way and sarcastic. So we were hired for 3 months for the opening of Epcot to do 10 shows a day in Italy, and we were performing in between because there was nothing else in Italy but us, and they said, boy, they'd never seen that, where we just kind of hang out all day and no one was trying to do a show. And then started inventing things like the Pusher Leg Tour of Italy, where we'd walk people around the Italy village there and point out things and make up stories about them. Within the first couple of weeks, they said, do you have any more people? We had a roster of 40 people. We were doing 20-plus Renaissance festivals by that time all over the country. And so we brought in some more people. So by Thanksgiving of 1982, we had a troupe in Italy and UK. By 1985, we were doing 45 shows a day at Epcot. And it was about that time that the Imagineers invited us into some meetings because they thought Future World was boring, and we agreed, and what we could do there. And so as a result, we created 3 different shows for Future World. And so we were doing, at one point, 45 shows a day. And SAC, on that 3-month contract, stayed 8 years and did, by the most conservative calculations I can make, we did about 42,000 street theater shows just at Epcot. We also did convention shows and travel shows for the travel company, and even tested a thing called the Disney Storytellers in the Magic Kingdom. But the fellow who ran the Magic Kingdom at the time didn't want to have it because it was something like Epcot. They're always fighting with each other. It was completely different. I mean, it was audience participation, but we did the budget cut extravaganza, Snow White and a couple of dwarfs. And then we also had Pinocchio with the 2 scripts we did over there. They were very, very well received, but We only did them a few times, on an experimental basis. And so I was in the middle of that consulting with Imagineering. Herbie and I were invited to spend a week at the Imagineering headquarters in Glendale, California, Southern California, next to Pasadena, to talk about putting more SAC theater-style interaction into new attractions. And we were introduced to projects they were working on that had not been greenlighted yet, but some of those projects became the Disney MGM, now Disney Hollywood Studios, Pleasure Island, and so on. And they asked me, have you ever thought about putting live actors in a brick-and-mortar ride? And I said, only since the very first time I read Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland in 1966. I thought, if only two of these pirates were real, it would transform the ride. And I believe that to this day. So that's the thumbnail version. We kept consulting with Disney once a month. Herb would go and take somebody else from SAC. Then the next month I would go and take someone from SAC. And then the third month in the rotation, he and I would go together. And they'd have a variety of projects for us. And if they didn't have a full week, we just wandered around and insinuated ourselves into whatever was going on. And within a few months of doing those consulting things, that they offered me a full-time position, which had been my life dream since the first time I saw Claude Coates showing Walt the model for Pirates of the Caribbean on The Wonderful World of Disney, and Walt said, "This is an Imagineer," and my head exploded hearing that word. And the first day we were at Imagineering, they had a reception for one of their longtime Imagineers to give him a diamond stud to put into his Disney name tag for 50 years of service, and it was that man, Claude Coates, and he and I became long and fast friends. So I spent a year with Herbie and Terry trying to reorganize SAC. I was artistic director at the time, in charge of hiring and training, creating scripts and all those things. And, of course, everybody got involved in all those processes, but that was my oversight responsibility. And so trying to figure out how could we do SAC if I wasn't there. And you don't want to be irreplaceable. You want the company to be strong enough without you, but you do need someone structurally, to whom the buck stops on the quality of our shows. Because SAC, unbeknownst to a lot of people, was organized as a for-profit company. And so when we were doing corporate shows, we had a money-back guarantee. If it didn't work, if it didn't accomplish the goals you asked us to accomplish, we'll fix it. So that's the thumbnail. And I went then and spent several years at Imagineering, headed up the team that created the idea of putting people in a rusty elevator and dropping them off the side of a deserted hotel.
And that's great. And here's the thing: just as you talk about that last bit there about money back guarantee, they've come a long way, because as you walk in the door of SAC now and you buy a ticket, there's a big sign saying tickets are non-refundable. So if you don't laugh, you got to go. So,
and in a place like the Comedy Lab, there's enough going on in the world, and there's enough information, and SAC's reputation is deep and far and long and wide, that nobody should come there and be in any way disappointed or surprised.
Right.
And when you've got a guy like Dave Russell, who's just a prince of a guy heading the thing up, he's not going to put anything out, whether it's the gang and and I don't know all the terminology in SAC, but whether it's one of the, I think, is it Monday night when they do the show with people who are in the Comedy Lab classes and so on. So going in, this is not our varsity team, and this and that and the other thing. So,
yeah, no, and I can't imagine. I don't know how much you look back now or you keep tabs on what goes on, kinds of things, and it's got to be like a parent to a certain extent. I wonder if you ever look back and think, are you behaving yourself? Are you doing what you need to do? Are you happy with the direction it took? Or there's a whole new younger team that's taken over that Dave has kind of allowed to the keys to the car, so to speak. And for the most part, I mean, it's working. It's working. I have mixed feelings about it, but we'll remove those. That said, the product is great. I mean, it is well known. They're in everything. They're doing festivals. They're doing. Mike Hart, who's now the artistic director, is doing things like the Brawl for All, which brings a lot of troops in, a lot a lot of influences from different areas to allow them a chance to hit the stage and interact. And I think some of that, in some instances, has led to some other ideas that they wouldn't have thought of. And so there's new blood, and they're trying, they're working it, and there's some proof to that it's working. But you know, when you guys, I wish I could have been there. I wish as I watch, for example, you guys have the alumni thing on the Facebook, and I love watching it. Every once in a while, someone will, and it's not a constant busy page on Facebook, but it's one that where someone posts something, it's relevant, and it's an insight, it's a tidbit, and I'm like, I wish I'd been there. I wish I could have felt the feeling of, you know, you guys were very pivotal to a lot of the things at Disney. You had a lot of influence there, and how that must have felt to be. And I don't know if you're in the moment and you're thinking, "Wow, look what I'm doing," or you have to wait until you look back at it and say, "Wow, look what we did." But that was so cool what you guys were doing. That was so big and so much of an influence of what Disney would become. That you know, Dave Russell shared with me on my old radio show the thing where apparently you guys came in one day and you guys had a cart that you'd created for one of your shows, and you right down to a little drawer on the bottom of it that had business cards for SAC Comedy Lab. And I guess Disney had duplicated the entire thing right down to the drawer on the bottom of it. And I don't how that felt, you know, the emotion of all that, because it's got a certain feel, but all the emotion associated with this new great thing you were creating, it would have been great to be a part of that, or at least witness it. It would have been so cool.
Well, I think some of what you're feeling, and I appreciate it, and certainly I get excited about it, can only come from looking back over the twists and turns of SAC's history that we never could have anticipated. I mean, when we did the first weekend at Minnesota Renaissance Festival in August of 1979, we were scared to poop and death. I mean, we fortunately had the rope ladder, and for the first couple of weekends, Herbie and I were the only ones doing shows because we sort of had in our head what might work, and we had a chemistry. And it's interesting, when I was training people to do, you know, we get new people into SAC at Disney. And some days I couldn't be there for rehearsal, so I'd ask Herbie to do it, or one of the other, you know, there was a handful of people that I trusted to train people. And people would come in to rehearsal, and they were stunned when they got the script, say to Romeo and Juliet, how much of what they thought was improvised and ad-libbed was in the script. And the thing that you had to do was teach people that, for example, if you pull a bald guy out of an audience, and that's a good guy to start with, you know. At one point, I analyzed 17 street theater scripts. We had 15 of them began with selecting a male senior citizen. And people say, what do you look for? I said, you look for facial beard or mustache. Bald is good. Hawaiian shirt with plaid pants is great. If you've got a hat on or smoking a pipe or a cigar. So if you found a bald, bearded, pipe-smoking, Hawaiian shirt-wearing senior citizen male, not only would you pick him to be Romeo or King Gorbaduck or whomever, you'd friggin' hire him to come back to every show that day. And it was amazing how by clockwork, and sometimes I would go out in my civilian clothes with the news crews to shoot SAC. And I looked to the audience and they say, now, do you pick these people ahead of time? And I said, no. And I pointed to 2 or 3 people in the audience. I said, they'll pick one of those 3 guys. And every time, that's who they pick, one of those 3 guys. So slowly but surely, there was a science to it. But it's interesting that Herbie and I, our timing was so different. You know, Herbie loved to just let a joke lay there. And I love to just, you know, make it, do it, and then move on. And so one day I was going out to do a show. I was scheduled in the United Kingdom at Epcot, and with somebody who had been there a long time, and then a new person. And it was their first show out at Epcot, but they'd been in rehearsal for a few weeks. And she said, now, do you do the shows Herbie's way, or do you do them Dee Dee's way? And as I grabbed the door to open for us to go right out to the show, I said, I do it my way. Try to keep up. And we went out. And he said later, he said, it was amazing. He said, it's the show that I rehearsed, but you just have a different pace. And everybody found their pace, and then you found your pace with each other. If acting is reacting, and reacting is based on listening, then you will do the same script a completely different way depending on who's in your troupe that day. And the troupe was 2 or 3 people at Epcot. And I love that about SAC. And then new people would come in, and they'd add their own warp and tickle. I mean, Dave Russell has his own style of doing stuff. You know, and it just doesn't matter who it is. You can watch the same script or the same show or the same theater game, and it's going to be different. And I think that's also then the history of SAC, that we've rolled with the punches. We never, ever would have imagined or even dreamed that SAC would become a fixture in the theater sports and comedy sports world, that we would have the effect on Disney of creating street theater. I mean, I had the idea to do, you know, what I coined as streetmosphere, what became the Hollywood Boulevard characters. I had that idea years before getting to SAC, and when I got to SAC, one day, Peter Blaustein, who had hired SAC, said, "Hey, you want to do something special for St. Patrick's Day at Epcot?" And I said, "Sure." And he and I brainstormed for about 2 minutes, and I went over and had a costume fitting at the Magic Kingdom, and they gave me one of the green sort of tuxedo-looking outfits from the Haunted Mansion, and I just walked around the World Showcase Promenade all day as St. Patrick, and that led to a whole series of those kind of interactions. And so when I got to Imagineering and said, you know, we need to have a mayor on Main Street USA, we need to have suffragettes, we need to have policemen and so on. I have a photograph. I don't know if I put it up yet. I'll have to put it up on the SAC one, I think. A photograph of myself doing a Main Street cop as a pre-show to one of the parades while I was at Imagineering. So I've got a beard, you know, and this was back in the days when all Disney theme park employees still look like lip-syncing, clean-shaven gay Mormons. And, you know, and I fought that battle for years. I just said, well, just change it. I said, it's not up to me to change it. And we fought and fought and fought. I remember when we hired Michael Marzellis, the big, giant guy had been playing King Henry at all the festivals for years, and we had to shave his beard. We had a party to shave his beard, and he says, if we're going to do it, he said, I'll have you do it. And we filmed it, and it was great fun. Or Jim Green, who had been the rat catcher for years at Renaissance Fest, so I think he's still probably doing the circuit. You know, he was one of the guys who came and did Dreamfinder. He shaved a red beard off to put on a fake red beard. So with Disney, it wasn't about having facial hair. It was about who owned the darn hair.
You know,
but we just never imagined when we started doing the Minnesota Festival that it would even become a troupe of 40-some people doing 20 or 30 festivals, crisscrossing the country. I mean, I headed the troupe that did the Maryland Renaissance Festival just outside of Baltimore and near Washington, D.C. for years and years and years. And there was a great lesson there learned because the sophistication of that audience was much different. We did a lot of political jokes and timely current event jokes in our shows. And one year, that troupe, most of us went to follow as soon as the festival closed in Maryland. We went to the Kansas City Renaissance Festival. That was a much more Midwestern, much simpler audience, not stupid at all. But we tried all our political jokes, and they just died. And it took us a day or two to kind of retool and do different ad-libs. And so we learned that going around the country, that there were different things. And so you learn, like, okay, who do people in Kansas City make fun of? Who do people in Minneapolis make fun of? Who do people in Detroit, you know, make fun of, so on. And so the same thing at Epcot, then you've got people from all over the world who you make fun of.
You know, and it's a good segue because you mentioned Michael Marzella, and here's the thing. I first became aware of him as his character Nigel Philister on the Streetmosphere way back when, and I don't know if I've been an annual pass holder for Disney since, you know, when they used to do it, and you had to go in and to customer service, and they took your picture and they laminated the picture, and they cut your picture out to look like a little circle to fit in the pass. And so when Epcot opened, and when back then MGM Hollywood Studios, the long name, opened up, I was like first in line and seeing these things for the very first time, and I fell in love with these shows because they were interactive. You could talk to them, and they would talk back to you, and they, Michael Marzella, he had a character, and I can't remember the name of it. You'd say something to him, he'd kind of go off on a crazy little rant, and they'd say another thing that brings him back to reality, and he'd sit there and he'd make these little paper boats, and they call them Philister frigates, and I still have one. And I went.
Wow.
And I went to. I was living in Largo years later, and or Tampa, and it was one weekend late at night before cable was real big. Because on some public access channel, they were doing the previous year's Renaissance Festival. And if you've ever heard Michael Marzella talk, you can't miss that voice for the life of you. And so I'm hearing this in half sleep. Oh my God, that's the guy from Disney. And I look up, and there he is, dressed as a king. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And lo and behold, they're doing it because it's happening the next several weekends. I'm like, uh-oh. So I went out and went down to the Renaissance Fair, went into the gate, fell in love, bought an outfit, a sword, the shoes, the hat, went out to the car, changed my clothes. It's when they let you have real swords back in there before they knew any better. Went back into the thing and went every weekend after that. And at the end of it, I gave both the Queen and the Sheriff's wife a bouquet of flowers at the end of the show, and they knighted me. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. This is great. Again, these pieces, I didn't put the pieces together about how SAC had a hand in all this. I did not put the pieces together about, and the average person wouldn't. But I don't know if people realize just how much influence. I mean, I have seen. I think David Russell had mentioned something about there was a mechanical show at Epcot where it was a robot. It was an interactive robot kind of thing. It looked like Mr. Roboto, and there was a little show. I guess you guys had some hand in that.
Right. It was the Professor Intelligence show, and it would be a male or female, white lab coat, horn-rimmed glasses, Band-Aid holding them together, high water shoes or pants, and then one of our folks, we had a handful of people who were very accomplished minds. Cindy Hasty Town, Tim Wade, John Fox, most notably, who was one of my co-directors for Street and Sphere, has been living in Japan for several years. John had trained and then became a trainer and coach at Ringling. And they were this robot. We'd bring them out on a hand cart, set them down, and then we had this giant handheld remote control unit. At one point, we'd hand it, and it would, kind of move and bow and shake people's hands. And then at one point we'd hand the remote control unit to a child and we'd say, now just move this, and the head will nod, and then the kid would start playing with it and the robot would go crazy and steal purses. That was one of the additional 5 shows that was added to Future World when the Imagineers said Future World is boring. And I remember asking the Imagineers, did you guys figure that out on your own, or did you talk to actual guests who, my phrase is always, we have seen the future and it's gray with purple accents. And so we added that. Then we had a show called Gutfred and Myrtle, which is this senior citizen couple who would just get lost in the long lines at Imagination or World of Motion or whatever and just do jokes with each other. And people were so afraid that the Disney management was so afraid that people would think we're making fun of them. Well, what happens with a couple like that, if there's an old couple, the old man will poke his wife and say, that's her, that's you, you're just like that. But he would never see himself in Gutfred. Right. And the same thing with the old women. They would never see themselves in Myrtle, but they would see their husband.
Right.
And so there was that. And then the third show was a little kind of trash can-sized rolling robot. And then there would be 2 of the actors in just civilian clothes in the audience. One of them was controlling the movement, and there wasn't that much movement. He could roll around and so on and blink and so on. And then the other one had a microphone up their sleeve, and it would do the voice, and there was some kind of a filter in it that changed the voice to different. And they could talk to people, and you could literally stand next to the person doing the voice and not know that's who you were talking to. So, along with Italy and UK, those are the other 3 Future World groups that we did. So
and it's interesting. I was unfortunately I'm not a rich man. Not that your book's expensive, but buying things is I have a choice to feed this or not. But the pages of the book that you gave me, it's interesting when you talk about brainstorming. We're talking about your book, Hatch: Brainstorming Secrets of a Theme Park Designer. And I get a glimpse of some of just an inkling of this, because if you've ever taken any of the classes at SACCOM or any improv class, first thing comes to mind is yes-anding. My first comes to mind is you've already said it, listening, watching, everything. And so when I read some of these pages, it's like the 7 agreements of brainstorming. The first thing I can think of is the rules of not really rules, but they're guidelines for improv. Yes, ending, listening to your partner, supporting your scene partner, thing like that. How much would you say of your experience in all that, the acting, the improvisation, and all the other things, influenced, what you've put in the pages of this book?
Well, it's a two-way street. A lot of what became the 7 agreements of brainstorming, we were using at SAC. They were further refined at Disney when I was invited, when they noticed that when I put a team together. I mean, I was heading up teams, brainstorming concept design teams at Imagineering while I was still a consultant. So when I switched to being a full-time Imagineer, left SAC, I hit the ground running. I didn't really have an intern time, if you will, and they noticed very quickly that my teams got to a lot of ideas and got to big ideas pretty quickly. And they said, "You have a system?" And I said, "Yes, it involves silent prayer, infant sacrifice, and standing knee deep in tapioca." Their only question was, "How do you spell tapioca?" And they didn't care what the system was. Is it transferable? Is it teachable? And so along with working on the day-to-day design and concept stuff at Imagineering, I was also been invited to teach the brainstorming system I've been using at Disney University, first throughout Imagineering and then eventually to all divisions of Disney. In fact, when I left in the early 90s, when I left my full-time position at Imagineering, I was kept on retainer through Michael Eisner's office to continue coaching and teaching at Disney University, and then also being available to just help facilitate brainstorming with any division on whatever project they may be working on. And so a lot of it is, one of the chief rules that everybody breaks. In fact, on the back cover of Hatch. And if people are trying to understand what we're saying, it's H-A-T-C-H, hatch, like hatch an idea, hatch an egg. Right at the top, on the back, it says, most brainstorming isn't brainstorming, not even close. Usually what's going on is playful arguing with snacks on the table. And so what I want to do is help people do playful, powerful brainstorming, keep the snacks, but no arguing. And one of the biggest mistakes everybody makes is they try to do creative thinking and critical thinking at the same time. Creative thinking, just creating a mound of ideas, and critical thinking, deciding. Well, typically what we do, somebody has an idea, you have an idea, and somebody says, "Oh, PJ, you're full of baloney," or "You must be new here, we tried that 2 years ago, that'll never work." Well, usually in a brainstorming session, the ideas you're throwing out are parts of ideas, parts of concepts, right, pieces. If Henry Ford was brainstorming the Model T and somebody says, "Well, it needs to have tires." Tires will never work. Well, shut up and put tires on the wall. and other things. And as I say to a lot of CEOs, what do you usually do? They say, "Well, you should come up with 2 or 3 ideas in a half hour, kick them around, and use the one we like best." And I said, well, first of all, there's no kicking in brainstorming. Number 2, what if in that same half hour we could come up with 200 or 300 ideas? And they said, "Well, how would you do that?" And I said, actually, a handful of people could come up with 2,000 or 3,000 ideas, but nobody can write that fast. But your brain is certainly that facile.
Right.
And so Hatch then was a way to put down on paper that system that I just make it very simple. I don't like these corporate gurus who come up with their own language so you can't remember the 7 agreements of brainstorming. In other words, any team, if you would agree like you're supposed to do as a child, agree to play well with others. I mean, that was the basis of SAC. You give the audience members something to do. If they do it, great. If they don't do it or do something different, better yet. Now we have to make it work, no matter what choice they make. Their choice is never wrong. The same thing with your fellow improvers. That's the yes and. Yes and is one of the 7 agreements of brainstorming. Whatever anybody else says, you add to it. Yes and. And no matter how wacky, how weird, in fact, one of the rules is we want wild ideas. And wild ideas are ideas you don't know what they mean when you first say them. They're expensive. Nobody knows how to do them. If somebody comes up with what everybody agrees is a good idea, it's too late for that idea. It's already been done. And when I go to the Magic Kingdom and I see my friend, Fran Gucci at SAC now doing one of the suffragettes on Main Street, and I think that it was 20 or 30 years ago that I first proposed that to Disneyland, and Michael Eisner said, "Let's do that." And the Disneyland management said, "No, why should we spend more money to give guests something for free they're not expecting it. And I said, but that's what Walt always said. The way we stay ahead is to give people the unexpected and the extra. And so that they're still doing it. I remember telling the Street Mystery cast during our rehearsals in '82, I said, if we get to do this for a year or a few years, it's going to be a miracle, because there's this huge entertainment, multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that has hired 31 of you to just kind of play with guests. And yet they figured out that Street Mystery in the early days was occupying the time of the same number of guests per hour that a major attraction would, between 15 and 2,500 guests an hour. Well, that's gold to them. That's 2,500 guests who are not walking around complaining about the lines, can't find a place to sit down, didn't like their hamburger, whatever it is. And the vice president of operations at Disney MGM took me up on the roof of Hollywood Boulevard one time and said, look at this. And we had 3 little pockets of guests standing watching a Street Mystery show that weren't off being bored or not doing something else.
Right.
And to him, that was terrific. So what I'm trying to do with Hatch is say, okay, the same system of creative idea development that we used at SAC, that we used at Imagineering. I mean, as I say in the book, this is the brainstorming process that I used to design the world's best 40th birthday party and a $1 billion theme park. So if you have something the size of a birthday party or something the size of Animal Kingdom, this will work. Now, if it's bigger than Animal Kingdom or smaller than the birthday party, I can't make you any guarantees. But just to say to any group, and I've been teaching this now to corporate groups all over the country, since before I left Disney. One of the reasons I left, things slowed down. My boss said, let me buy you out of your contract, and then you'll be free to go and speak and do whatever you want.
All I can say is, wow. I'm so happy you're talking to me. As you talk about this stuff, and I think about my relationship and my experience with Disney and SAC and the different things along the way, and I watch as things change. For example, I walk through Disney now, and unfortunately, the further and further and further away we get from Disney, any Disney's influence on anything Disney, it really gets far away from it. For example, I for a long time when I would go to Hollywood studios, I would pick up my itinerary thing, and I would look at what times they were playing, and the Street Mystery people, and I'd say, okay, I would go there specifically to see that. That's what I wanted, and I would hope it wouldn't rain, because oftentimes they would postpone things, and so I would go there, and I would go there for and okay, so now I've got an hour to eat. Then Mike Marzello or the guy will be out, or the other characters will be out. But now what's happened is it's turned into, and this is just from a fan, and I. When I give feedback to SAC, I got to remind them that although I'm a tech there and although I'm a lab rat and all that, I am also a fan. So I've got to remind them, because they have feelings as well, and they take things from different levels, and they expect you to be a certain way. But I'm also a fan, and as a fan, I want to tell you what I don't like. It's become a SAC show. A lot of the stuff is pre-planned. A lot of the stuff is, rather than where they would go and they'd have these relationships or interactions based on, I think way back when, it was originally, that you had the starlet that was coming to Hollywood to be a star. You had the kind of dirty producer. You had the has-been actor, and then from that they would do some things. And what I see more often than not now is pre-planned, pre-thought games from SAC. And I say SAC, I'm sure SAC doesn't own them, but I'm seeing 99 Jokes. I'm seeing so the interaction is not as much there as it was. At least not what I was liking. Now, now they do get a crowd. They do get that crowd that builds around them, and they do. But more often than not, it's kind of removed, because they're doing a show versus interacting with as much as with the audience. So now I've kind of fallen out of love with it. Now, it may be the progression they needed. Maybe this gives them, the management side of things, more of what they need to manage whatever they need to manage. But from the fan side, I'm thinking I would wish, and maybe it's also I'm getting old, I wish it wouldn't change so much, or I wish they would have both. But I'm not seeing both. So I don't.
Both is good. Yeah, we made a conscious effort at the beginning when I coined the term Street Mystery, because Michael Eisner said when they're doing studio tour, he said, "Are you going to have the characters like they have at Universal?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, Charlie Chaplin." I said, "Well, I don't think so." So I went over and spent 3 days at Universal Hollywood, and I watched the guy playing Charlie Chaplin, or the couple doing Lucille Ball, Lucy and Desi, or the guy doing W.C. Fields. And there were kind of three levels of encounter, if you would. 80% of people would walk by and they'd look over and they'd point at the guy and say, oh, look, there's a guy pretending to be W.C. Fields, and they'd move on down the road.
Yes.
And another maybe 10-20% of the people would go over and say, can we have a picture taken? Well, yeah, stand here next to me. Now, they don't realize, because at one time, one of my roommates who had been a tuba player at Disney World became W.C. Fields, and he was about the right size for Fields in reality. Did incredible research, dyed his hair to match Fields' orange hair. Well, nobody knew that he had this orange-red hair because his films were all in black and white. Did the research, worked on the voice, so on and so on. And only a very, very few people, 4 or 5%, would have that close encounter with the guy being W.C. Fields, because they all knew he's dead. Then I also found out there's this lawyer, because I got a call from him, who represents all the dead people in Hollywood. And if you want to use their picture on a poster or their image in performance, you have to pay this guy, it's a bargain, $60-80 a month. And then he'll send, 10% of that check to the nearest living relative. And I just said to Michael, I said, I don't think it's as interesting as, and then one day I performed these characters. We did cartoons of them, put them up on the wall, and as I would reveal each one, I would pull on a quick hat or I'd just go into character. And we had tested them in Magic Kingdom at the Autograph Hound. It just got huge crowds, and we filmed them, and I was wearing a microphone and so on. But I also did an undertaker at the Haunted Mansion. I did a baggage handler in front of Star Tours, very popular. But as I said earlier, the Disneyland management didn't want to do that. But the Streetmosphere characters, and I said it's not Streetmosphere. It's not a staged, scripted time. Every hour on the half hour at Italy. Il Teatro di Bologna. It's just it happens as it happens. Now we had a schedule, and it was such that they were always overlapping. So there were always people out there on Hollywood Boulevard all day long. It was never empty. But I think it becomes an operational thing that they want to have more control on. They want to know when you're there, where you're going to be standing, what you're going to be doing. And so I think that was the evolution into doing, more staged shows and microphones and all those. That's not bad. It's just not best, I don't think. No, I'm with you. I think they should do both. I think the shows are, at least the ones I've seen, were too long. I was there recently and saw... or not that recently, a couple years ago, and Herbie was still there doing the director's show and so on. And just terrific, hilarious, wonderful. The audience liked it. But if you would watch, the audience would grow and grow and grow, and then it would peel off. People wouldn't stay. And, at Epcot, we always try to do 20 minutes, and we're in and we're out. So I think some of the interaction and just the playing with the guests, I think, could be fun. I'm not familiar with what they're doing now. I've never seen the street, whatever that is they're doing at the World Showcase that I think is SAC. I've seen pictures of it, and I'm sure it's not like SAC at all. For a while, some of the people that were heading it up were people that SAC had let go because they weren't strong enough. And it may have evolved. It may be terrific now, but for a while it just looked to me like they'd taken some baseball caps, put some funny props glued onto them, put them on a person's head and say, stand here while we make fun of you. Well, that's not street theater.
Well,
embarrassing people can be funny, but it is not entertainment.
Okay, I think now they're referring to them as citizens of Hollywood, which is okay. That's cool. But they have a couple of, I want to say, different segments of it, troops, so to speak, inner workings, whatever, one of which is the Public Works Department, which is, they come out in their little truck and they've got a bunch of guys dressed. One guy's got it's more a slapstick kind of comedy. And the difference, just from my education from SAC, because I'm not like a trained actor or anything like that. I'm limited to what I've learned from SAC, which is quite a bit. And don't mean to minimize what they teach. It's been awesome. But people like Mike Carr, people like yourself, people like Dave Russell, you guys have really, you're a lot more qualified than I to. But what I've watched is. These guys are coming out. They're doing about a 20 or 30 minute stint. It's more of a Laurel and Hardy kind of thing, where who's on first, or you know what I mean, Abbott and Costello, who's on first kind of thing, and it's very funny, and it's from watching the artistic side of it, watching people keep keep these characters for 20, 30, 40 minutes, and they do interact somewhat with the guests, but more often than not, it's a funny little show, and someone gets their arm caught in a mailbox, and they spend their hour trying to get them, or a half hour trying to get their arm stuck out of the mailbox, but it's fun, it's funny, people are loving it, but again, what I liked about Satcom and what I like about the stuff that used to be there was that you could interact with them. You could throw them a curveball and they would go with it. I mean, even from taking a picture, you'd have two characters there. Give me pose number one, and they would come up with pose number one. And you go. And a funny thing is they'd have people that would play with that and then go back to pose number one, and they'd forget what pose number one was. But that's okay. For me, I like that. It's like the dinner theater at Disney, for example, the Hoop-de-Doo Review, which has been running for years. Yes, it's staged, but you can interact with them. What I like about that is. While, yes, it's staged, if you go enough, it's different every time because someone's going to miss a mark, someone's going to do this. And for me, that's what I like. Not that I'm hoping that they mess up, mind you, but I like the spontaneity of it. I like the interaction of it. I like the fact that, if I wanted to watch TV, I can go home and watch TV. I want to interplay with these people. And I think Disney, sad part is, I think Disney's getting away from all that. And maybe it's easier, maybe it's safer, I don't know, maybe the times have changed, who knows what. But... let's talk about change gears a little bit. We're talking about your book now. I like the fact that you've made reference to the e-ticket on here. This is a cool thing. I'm old enough to know what an e-ticket is, and I remember anybody just a little history on Disney. Now I think they're all photo stations. They're like where you buy photo, if they even have any of these left. They used to have these little circular photo mat kind of buildings where you'd go and buy your tickets, and you'd have to get so many tickets to get on so many rides. X number of e-tickets would get you, I think it was almost like, it was a ticket book, and you had X number of these, and you'd have to go back.
Yeah, the tickets were A through E. E were the big rides. A were things like riding the fire truck down Main Street. And it's interesting that the term is e-ticket, because when you look on all of the tickets, it says coupon. It doesn't say ticket, but we call them e-tickets. And e-ticket became the term in our society that means the big thing. Sally Ride, the astronaut, said this is definitely an e-ticket. And she said that more than a decade after e-tickets had gone away.
Right. So if you, what haven't you done? What is it? If you could do anything now, what does McNair Wilson want? What do you want to do that you haven't done?
I'd like to date Emma Stone.
Really? Well,
the actress. I'm kidding.
No, she hasn't. Well, no, that's a safe one because she's not had controversy yet. So, some of these
I'd like. I'm living the life. I would love to be busier in terms of speaking and coaching and doing more of that. Some of that has to do with me. I'm responsible for how much of that I'm doing, and so I'm working on getting more bookings. I'd like to do more things on a regular basis in Orlando, because one of the things when I do a corporate event down there is I do a thing called the Behind the Dreams tour, where I take people for a day in one of the theme parks, and we talk about the way they work. We don't go behind the scenes. I tell them, first of all, A, I can't get you back there, and B, if I could, in about 30 seconds, you'd be bored to tears. I said, if you've ever been behind the scenes at a Walmart or a grocery store, you've seen the utilidor, the quote-unquote underground hallways of the Magic Kingdom, which are technically not underground. It's the first story of a two-story building, and the second story is Main Street, USA. But they landscape it so you don't know that. But so I would like to be doing more of that. I am working on the follow-up book to Hatch. When I started teaching brainstorming at Disney University, the executives that were taking the class say, I understand your process, but I'm not creative. I said, what do you mean you're not creative? Everybody's creative. Well, people associate the word creative or creativity with art supplies and dance classes and actors in theatrical productions. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Those are creative enterprises, but they are not. There's so many ways to be creative. And so I came up with, the short version is I came up with a talk called Recapturing Your Creative Spirit, which I premiered at a police convention where I went as the substitute speaker for Michael Eisner, who back in the early days didn't want to speak much, but he said, you're funny, would you ever do something at a corporate event? I said, sure, I'd be happy to. It was very well received, standing ovation, and a friend that was with me said, what do you think of that? I said, that's what I really want to do. So I went back to Disney University and said, I've got this new piece I want to add on helping them understand their creativity. So we always did recapturing your creative spirit, then brainstorming. But I knew that when I did the book, the practical and probably most obvious sell would be the brainstorming book. So that's why we did that book first. So the next book, the second book, which does not have a title yet, it won't be called Recapture Your Creative Spirit, because the word creative throws people off. They say, well, that's not for me. But it is the book that will help you understand, that you are creative. What are the evidences of that? In fact, if people go to my blog site, www.teawithmcnair, tea like the drink, T-E-A with, W-I-T-H McNair, M-C-N-A-I-R, they'll see, they can watch a 1-hour video of Tea with McNair from a TED conference here in Denver. And so then there'll be a third book on creative communications, which will both be on public speaking, but as well as how to manage and get the most out of your social media and your emails and all those kind of things, and not let them control your life. So hopefully my life is going to continue to be about helping people access the best parts of them to pursue and fulfill some of their dreams, which may not be your job. But UCLA Medical School, in their Real Age project, said if you're pursuing your life's dream, your passion, you can add or subtract 6 years to your life. So figure out what it is you love to do, that you do for free. If we gave you a year off, that's what you do. Figure out what that is, and then figure out how you can do that an hour a week, a few hours a week, or even, earn a living at it. So to continue to coach people in that, and to keep my thumb in the feet, to keep my thumb and my feet in the theater. I still have my 2 one-man plays that I do everywhere, and every once in a while I go to a college for 4, 5, 6 weeks and direct a play and teach some classes and stay in it that way. Don't really have time to stop and be in a play, but, maybe that will present itself down the road somewhere.
Well, I had the privilege of seeing you, I think it was you, Terry, and Herb do when you were here for the 30th reunion, and it was too short though.
Sack Triple X.
Yeah, you were out there by the tree, and you did a little bit of what you did at the Renaissance Fair, and it was very, very as a fan, it was a wonderful thing. And
we had not, the three of us had not acted together in, 15, 20 years. We went into it was the old lab down at the parking lot. We went in there, and I think we just did one kind of stumble through. And I think we had Morgan or somebody who said, sit in and watch to see if we've forgotten anything. I still had a script somewhere that I went and read back through. And it was great. It was fun because Herbie and I were doing the 2 messenger roles, picking people out of the audience. And the real challenge of that show was we were doing a show for people who had done that script, for people who knew every nuance of it. And, who do you pick out of the audience? Because whoever you pick is a ringer.
Right. No, and that's true. That's so true.
Deadly.
And I'll let you go in a minute because you've actually given me more time than I thought we'd have, and I really appreciate it.
I'm fine.
For those of you that don't know, SAC has actually a lot of great notable talent has come from SAC Comedy Lab, and there's some hidden gems here as well. Some that have not had a chance to show you what they have, and I think in years to come, a lot of different talents are going to come. We have Joel McCreary that's out there. You have Wayne Brady that's out there. You have Jonathan Mangum that's out there. You have oh good Lord, and I know I'm forgetting. There's a whole bunch of people that came from SAC Comedy, and if you've never been, go visit SAC.com for there's all sorts of stuff there, and they're doing shows here. And it's going to kill my roommate because we have an improv troupe, but we don't really have a home right now to play with. So, but you know what? You can't knock a good thing, and then SAC is. And I'm going to say this because I need to say it. I have my differences with how they run some things, but that's the way it is, and I accept that. I have this fantasy that I win the lottery, and I invite you and the other leaders of SAC back, and you kick the butt of the people that are there and say, "Hey, look, this is the way it should be done." And because I've spent a good deal of time. That brings up a good point, PJ. I spend a lot of time at theater conferences, and I try to have lunch every day with college age or just out of college theater kids, and every one of them has in common they want to start their own theater company. And I say, great, do it, but first, find a friend, and the two of you move to Seattle or Minneapolis, where there's a lot of theater companies. Orlando would be a good choice too.
And each of you join in any way you can, even as an unpaid volunteer intern, join one of those companies. So in a year, the two of you will have 2 years of experience in two different theater companies, and then do it a second year. And then sit down and make a list of what you learned that was good and what you want to bring over into your theater company and what you would do different. And we'll make sure that you spend a day or a week following the artistic director around, because if it's like anything else, one of the best in the country is Lamb's Players, a professional repertory theater company in San Diego. And my friend Bob Smith, who runs it, and I went there one night to see a play, got there a little early, and Bob says, "Here, help me with this." Handed me a bucket and some rubber gloves. The janitor was sick. They hadn't cleaned the bathrooms, and the house was going to open in about 30 minutes. And so he and I cleaned the men's and ladies' bathrooms. And he's the friggin' artistic director. He's in charge here. He wears the necktie. Yeah, and the bathrooms need cleaning.
You know, and
so I say to people, you know, when you're involved in a theater company and you're not in charge and it's not run the way you would, hang in there. You're their party. You play their game by their rules. If you can get in a position to have an influence on that, or if you can make a suggestion like, "Hey, have you ever tried it this way?" Maybe they've never thought of it, but find a way to make it a suggestion and not an angry, you know, like going to guest relations.
Right.
And at least learn from it. But yeah, SAC has had some amazing folks come in and come out of it. And who knew? I mean, who knew that Morgan and Russell would get Dave and Morgan would get married and have, you know, those two ridiculous kids and. Which they keep in a box, fortunately,
right.
So they won't hurt the other children in the neighborhood. But, you know, we don't know. And I, you know, never would have guessed down the road that my life would be what it is. I was going to say, one of the things that I thought of just as a complete parenthetical thing, if you want to see some great street theater at Disney these days, go over to the new Dumbo's circus area and watch my friend Joe Wesson, who taught it at Ringling, and he was one of our first policemen. He was one of the first people that was part of the Hollywood, you know, street cleaning group, and he's there with Jennifer Broussard, who was in the early days. She was hired at Disney World, and her husband was hired to be one of the first Indiana Jones. I don't think there's a show at Disney World that Jennifer hasn't been in, from Hoop-de-Doo to who knows what. And I did Hoop-de-Doo for a couple of years too. But the point is, do the most you can. When I got into Hoop-de-Doo, everybody's afraid because I was going to start doing SAC. Well, I didn't do SAC, but I certainly used a lot of my improv, and it affected the way the other people did the show.
Yes.
And we had a lot of people then in Hoop-de-Doo say, "Can we come and take some SAC theater classes?" You know, we weren't doing classes at the time, and that made us think, well, maybe we should. So, you know, work with what's in front of you, and until you've mastered that, you don't really have a lot of time to try to be fixing things that aren't out there. But certainly keep your eye on how to fix and improve those things. But I think SAC, if anything, it's a history of growth and possibilities. When I pulled Herb and Terry out into the parking lot one day on La Quinta Road that's no longer there and said, "Hey, I've got an invitation to go over to Imagineering full time," they both teared up, gave me a big hug, and they couldn't have been more excited for me. They knew it was a natural evolution for, you know, where we were going. I'd been with SAC on and off since we started in '77, so it was, you know, pretty near 8 years in between doing my one-man show, so it was a nice progression. And they weren't bitter. We stayed friends. I continued to use SAC for everything I could, and so I appreciate that about that. And that has as much to do with the personalities that have been in charge of SAC over the years as it does with whatever it is SAC is doing. And I'm sure 5 years from now they'll be doing things that you nor I could even imagine them getting into. At least I hope they will be. If they're not, I'm going to come down there.
No, I have no doubt they'll be there. I have no doubt in some format SAC will be somewhere. So, no doubt at all. It's I won't say an institution, but it's a healthy part of the community, I think. So, well, Mr. Wilson, I want to thank you so much. You've given me an hour, and I thank you so very much for the hour. What's going to happen is as soon as I get this rendered, I'll get it up on YouTube so people can watch it when they want to watch it. And thank you so much for your time. And just so you know that it means the world to me I can never ever, I'm like a guy who watches old reruns of Andy Griffith simply because I want to imagine what it was like to be in that time. So when I hear from you guys, or I watch your exchanges, or SAC Comedy Lab and the SAC Theater Company has been a part of my life, and probably a lot of people's lives, in so many different ways and at so many different points in my life. That and the fact that I'm conscious of it, and I hope other people can be conscious of it, because I think it's a very, very special thing, and that I get to talk.
Well, let me
you.
just
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to thank you. You've been after me to be on your podcast for a long time, and we finally made it happen. So it's and you stayed with it enthusiastically. I mean, I've been in touch with you for years now. And if I could just again tell people, if they want to, they can download the first chapter of my book for free at the blog Tea with McNair. They can watch the Recapturing Creative Spirit video. There's a link there. And then there's also a link to a wonderful new website if they want to purchase Hatch, called Givingtons.com. Giving, T-O-N-S, Givingtons.com. Givingtons is an online store. They call it the Generosity Shop, where you can get almost any book that's out there. But they also have coffee and gifts, and they have a lot of handmade things that are made by nonprofit groups that are working with the handicapped and with folks that are kind of living on the edge, that maybe have been homeless and are trying to get back.
Right.
And what Givingtons does, whatever you buy, they will donate 30 to 50% of their profits on every purchase to a charity that when you check out, if you just go and buy one copy of Hatch, when you check out,
Yes.
there'll be a list of nonprofits there, and right now they're trying to work with smaller ones, and they'll give a portion of that to that charity, and they're trying to grow and make big. So when you're buying stuff online, think about going to Givingtons.com first. Other than if you buy my book, I don't make a nickel from sending people there. It's something I believe in. And but they also have a program that if for some reason you're on Amazon, they've done a program through Amazon that the profits they make from Amazon on my book also get donated to a charity. It's done quietly and behind the scenes, but hopefully it'll influence how Amazon and other groups like that think about the way they do business. So have a peek there, and if you watch my blog, you can. It's dedicated to helping anybody on a daily basis recapture and renew their creative spirit. I try to log on and get something new every couple of times a week, and that's also the place where people will get information about the next book and other materials. There is a Facebook site, facebook.com/Hatch by McNair Wilson, where there'll be news about the new book, and I'm on Twitter and all those things under my real name. But the best thing is just to use Tea with McNair, because that's sort of the hub for all things McNair. And if this has not been interesting to you, I admire your courage for listening to PJ and me this long at something you didn't enjoy.
No, and I'll get a link up to Tea with McNair on my
Thanks.
site, so that they'll have that. I'll have that before the end of the day. So, sir,
let's do this. Let's do this again after you've gotten in charge of SAC and fixed all the stuff you don't like there. We'll do it again.
Well, yeah,
or maybe when the next.
Can we get someone more
Next book
popular though?
comes out.
Can you possibly call Wayne Brady or maybe somebody popular and have them on with us? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'll get right on that.
Maybe. Do you know Dave Russell? Do you have his number? Maybe we can get him on.
You know what's funny is I know Dave and Morgan very well.
They're great people.
And I won't give you any details, but
no, give us details.
in fact, I like Morgan first. But
oh, that's great. That's good news.
Well, I had a long-standing policy about not having personal relationships with people that I work with, and in the theater that's hard because if you're doing a play, and I've done some plays with some pretty fascinating women, but it does make for a much more exciting cast party on closing night. Anyway, but it's interesting, through all of this, I've never met Wayne Brady. That's how long it's been since I've been with SAC Theater. That's why I just smile when I think about those guys, or when I see a movie that Claire Sarah is in. I mean, the only reason I even saw The Princess Bride, because it's just my diet won't allow me to have that much sugar. Not Princess Bride. What was it called? That she and Joel were in with Julie Andrews and
I'm not sure.
The two princess movies. Anyway, Princess Diaries.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, so I just am pleased as punch that somewhere way back when we created something. I mean, I hired Will Serra. It took me 3 years to get Mr. Will, and that he went off and was with the Canadian troupe, and that we discovered Claire there, who's just, as good as it gets. She's as smart and as clever and as witty a person as exists in our world of comedy and all that. And so it's just, to be a small part of the early catalyst of making that happen, and then things go beyond that. So I take full credit for all the good stuff about Wayne Brady and no credit for anything about him you don't like. So
all right, that's cool. All right, I want to thank you so much. It's time for me to
thank you, PJ.
Close the show. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate your time with me, and I hopefully we'll do this again. I'm going to let you go now. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, guys. I want to thank you guys very much. It was C. McNair Wilson gave me a great time. He spent over an hour with me today. I was not expecting an hour, maybe half hour, 40 minutes. This man, much like Terry Olson, much like Herb Henson, much like David Russell, these people that have kept SAC Comedy Lab alive, that have influenced Disney shows. Dave Russell, for example, Monsters Inc., the laugh floor there, it was his baby. Mike Carr, the current artistic director, he was the one who recruited him. Awesome stuff, guys. So I urge you to take him. By the way, let me make this really clear to you people. The current artistic director did not know who C. McNair Wilson was. I think there ought to be an orientation for SAC Comedy Lab. If you're going to run the place, you should know where it came from. That's just me talking. But you know what? Mr. Wilson says I should let things go that I can't affect. So there you go. You do what you want with that. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me today. We're going to do our best to have some other people. I've got some other people lined up that have tentatively said yes. As soon as I get them on board, I'll let you know. And if you want to participate, you may do so. Thank you very much, and you have a good day. This has been PJ and Friends.